Next Friday, it will be precisely 365 days since nearly 2,000 Debenhams workers received the shocking news via email from Debenhams that they were being dumped after decades of loyal service. And those workers were soon to discover that despite having a collective agreement for 2 + 2 weeks of redundancy per year of service, that they were getting nothing from this company that continues to generate tens of millions in online sales, including in this country. I have to say, I have to use this opportunity to pay tribute to those Debenhams workers who continue to fight on, who frankly are an inspiring exemplar of the decency, the dignity and the determination of working people, and particularly examples of women fighting for their rights and for decent treatment. But your government failed to protect them. Successive governments had failed, following Cleary's, to actually introduce the legislation necessary to prevent this sort of despicable treatment of these workers. And I should say it's also in the last week or so that 460 Arcadia workers also were reluctantly forced to accept statutory redundancy from Arcadia, again a company who had committed in agreement to pay them 2 + 2 weeks. Again, failed by your government because your government and successive governments failed to act after Cleary's to introduce the necessary legislative protection for workers. But the despicable treatment of the Debenhams workers reached new lows last night in your constituency in Blanchardstown, where agents acting for the liquidators, KPMG, in the midst of level 5 restrictions, sent strikebreakers into the Blanchardstown store with people packing up boxes and loading up trucks to take away stock. Workers, shop stewards, mothers and grandmothers who were there peacefully protesting, socially distanced, were lifted by the guards off the ground and dragged away. Meanwhile, strikebreakers were allowed to take stock out of the store and move away unhindered. So I ask you this, Taoiseach, since when is strike breaking an essential category of work during level 5? Is that acceptable? Since when are workers who've been treated in a despicable way denied the right to socially distance in a responsible way and in a peaceful way to protest against their despicable treatment? And when, Taoiseach, are you going to introduce the legislation to ensure that the despicable treatment of workers like Debenhams and Arcadia will never happen again?
Thanks, Deputy. I only heard about those events in the last hour or so, and without knowing all the facts, I don't really want to comment on them any further. But what I do want to say is I do believe that the former Debenhams workers were very badly treated by their employer in the way that they were laid off over a year ago. And the government has done all that it can to ensure that their legal rights and entitlements were upheld. Over 10 million has been paid already in statutory redundancy payments from the Social Insurance Fund to former Debenhams workers, and another 3 million has been offered on ex gratia basis in terms of a retraining fund for workers, and there are discussions about how that might be deployed with the unions today, in fact. The government at Taoiseach level, at my level, and also at other levels has met the workers, the unions, Debenhams UK, contacted the liquidators, involved the WRC, an office under my remit, and also involved the chairman of the Labour Court. So huge efforts have been made to resolve these issues in a way that is fair, but also in a way that is legal and doesn't create other unfair precedents. But I do think that the Debenhams workers haven't been treated very fairly in other ways, in the sense that they haven't always been told the full truth of this dispute. The comparison that you make with Cleary's is a bogus one. In that dispute, there was a very large and valuable property asset, a big building on O'Connell Street, and as a result of that, it was possible for additional payments to be made to the former Cleary's workers. In this case, the only assets are some fixtures and some stock, assets that are declining in value every day, and assets that have a total value that does not exceed the monies owed by Debenhams to others. It's not the same as Cleary's. It's very different. And while we will and can make changes to company law and employment law, those changes that might have resulted in a different outcome in Cleary's would not have resulted, I believe, in a different outcome in Debenhams. And indeed, Deputy Smith has acknowledged that in comments she's made in the Chamber, Deputy Reid Smith. In terms of the collective agreement, the 2+2 that you mentioned, when this was looked at by the Chairman of the Labour Court, he questioned as to whether that was valid in the event of an insolvency. That was a collective agreement made in 2016 when voluntary redundancies were being made. It is highly questionable as to whether such an agreement applied in the event of an insolvency, and certainly didn't apply in law, whatever about it, in contract. And also examples have been raised in relation to IBRC, suggestions made that public money, government money, exchequer money was used to pay termination payments there. And we know now that was not the case. And I really think there are many sad aspects of this whole affair, both the way in which Debenhams workers were treated by their employer, but also the way they've been misinformed by certain people all along, and that's wrong too.
I wouldn't patronise the Debenhams workers by suggesting that they don't know precisely how they've been treated and what the facts of their dispute are. But isn't it funny, as one of the shop stewards said to me today, both in Debenhams and in Arcadia, I talked to them both before this, isn't it funny how the law and the system always favours the big corporations over, as the workers described themselves, the little people? So KPMG, a massively wealthy accountancy firm, sends its agents in level 5 restrictions for non-essential retail to break a strike, and it's allowed to do it. But the workers who peacefully protest with masks, socially distant, are lifted off the protest. That's the reality. How is it the law never protects the workers? How is it the government? It's always too complicated to protect the workers. You know, one of the Arcadia workers just told me that one of them, this is the 3rd occasion in her lifetime that she has not got her redundancy entitlements in situations of retail resolvency because successive governments have failed to act to protect workers. There's always emergency legislation for the big people. There's always excuses for them, but never to protect the workers who are treated in this despicable way.
Deputy, you know full well that the legal entitlement to a redundancy in Ireland is 2 weeks per year of service. That is statutory redundancy. If we decide as a House, as a government, to make it 3 or make it 4, so be it. But that cannot apply retrospectively. The legal entitlement is 2 weeks per year of service. Yes, sometimes people have collective agreements that entitle them to more in certain circumstances. But as is almost always the case, if not always the case, such collective agreements for additional redundancy payments apply in a structured redundancy scheme, not in the event of a liquidation or an insolvency. And I think that's an important point in this that people have chosen not to recognise. You mentioned about how the law works. This is a big corporation, Debenhams, a corporation that failed. The owners of that company, the shareholders, lost all their money. In insolvency, the first people to be wiped out are the owners, the shareholders in a company. And when there's money left in the end, then there are creditors. And the people who are highest up on the list of creditors are the public, for example, to the revenue commissioners and local authorities, and also workers in relation to unpaid wages and statutory redundancy. But collective agreements for additional redundancy occur and apply when a voluntary redundancy scheme is happening or an agreed redundancy scheme is happening. They don't apply in the event of a liquidation.
We're over time. Thank you.